Jon Stark, the crowned king in the north, stood at the heart of a storm greater than any snow that ever fell on Winterfell. Word of his coronation spread like wildfire, carried by raven and rumour, shaking every corner of Westeros. In the halls of Riverrun, the Tullys whispered about their daughter Catelyn's strained relationship with him, how the very boy she once despised now bore the weight of the North's loyalty. In King's Landing, the Lannisters raged. Cersei's lips curled into that venomous smile, muttering that another wolf had risen from the cold to bite at their throats. And in Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon clenched his fists, muttering about duty and oaths, already plotting how he might bend the young wolf to his cause. But let's not rush this. Think about the North first. Jon's rise didn't simply unite the Lords. It created fractures too. Robb Stark, proud and loyal, struggled to accept his new place. He was no longer the golden son of Winterfell, no longer destined for lordship. Every time bannermen looked at Jon with respect, Robb's gut twisted. I should have been the one, he thought during lonely nights. Arya, meanwhile, became fiercer in her defense of Jon, snapping at anyone who dared question his right. Sansa felt lost. Her dreams of being queen in King's Landing seemed trivial compared to her brother's new crown. And Catelyn? Oh, her. Silence grew heavier, her gaze colder, every meal at the high table poisoned by the truth she could not erase. Jon Stark, not her blood, ruled over her children's fate. Now here's where it gets insane, because the bannermen weren't blind to these tensions. The great Jon laughed and drank for Jon's victories, but others whispered, "Can a boy so young keep us united? Can a bastard-turned heir truly command the loyalty of old houses?" It didn't matter that Ned had named him Trueborn. Old prejudices. Die hard. Every feast, every council, Jon had to prove himself again and again. Yet there was something in his eyes, the quiet intensity of a wolf who'd seen more than his years should allow, that silenced doubt. Lords left his chambers uneasy, unsettled, because the boy carried both the patience of winter and the fury of the storm. But what happens when the South reacts? Remember, Ned Stark's death in King's Landing still comes. The trap is set. Betrayal by Littlefinger still strikes, and Eddard loses his head before the sept of Baelor. Only this time the North doesn't rise under Robb's banner. It's Jon Stark the Lords proclaim as their avenger. His war council becomes the stage for strategies never seen before. He listens carefully to his bannermen, then speaks with that blunt, unyielding voice. "The Lannisters think we're broken. We'll show them wolves don't kneel. We fight. Wait. Think about how different the war becomes now. Jon isn't just leading out of pride. He carries Ned's name, his lessons, his discipline. He doesn't march blindly south with every banner at his back like Robb once did. He knows the cost of war, the danger of overreaching. Jon sends smaller hosts, strikes quick, avoids needless bloodshed, while Winterfell remains guarded. And this cautious brilliance? It earns him the nickname not of the young wolf, but the silent wolf. The one who strikes without warning, whose silence chills even his enemies. In the Red Keep, Cersei seethes. "Another Stark boy with delusions of kingship," she spits, though fear lingers in her tone. Tywin, cold and calculating, does not underestimate this heir. Ned Stark raised him well. If he carries his father's honor, he's dangerous. If he carries his father's cunning, he's deadly. The Lannisters begin their plots not just against a rebellious North, but against Jon Stark himself. And Tyrion, watching from the shadows, wonders aloud, what kind of king does a wolf make when winter comes? Meanwhile, across the sea, whispers of Jon's rise drift to Daenerys Targaryen. She too is claiming her birthright, gathering strength with dragons at her side. The thought of a Stark heir ruling the frozen lands troubles her advisers. "The wolves are stubborn," Ser Jorah warns. "If they name one king, they will never kneel to another." The seeds of a future clash are planted, not between Daenerys and Robb, but between Daenerys and Jon. Two heirs shaped by fire and ice. Now let's pause, because here's the kicker. Jon does not yet know the truth of his blood, that Rhaegar's fire runs through his veins. He rules as a Stark, not a Targaryen. But the moment that truth comes, the moment it collides with his crown, everything he's built will shake. Imagine the bannermen's faces when they hear it. Imagine Catelyn's horror when she learns the boy she loathed carried dragon blood all along. Imagine the Seven Kingdoms realizing the wolf in the north might also be the dragon destined to claim the Iron Throne. But before we leap too far, consider the personal struggle, because Jon is not free from doubt. In the quiet of Winterfell's Godswood, kneeling before the heart tree, he whispers, "Father, am I enough? Can I bear this crown? Or will my choices doom us all?" The cold wind answers nothing, only biting his skin, reminding him winter is always coming. And in that silence, Jon feels the burden not only of his crown, but of his father's honor, his mother's absence, his people's survival. Oh my God, can you see the tension building? Jon isn't the bastard standing at the edge of the table anymore. He is the table, the crown, the wolf the South must fear. And yet every decision he makes, every step carries the risk of betrayal, loss, and blood. Because in this game, even kings raised on honor are prey to daggers in the dark. And here's where it gets wild, because what happens next, when Jon faces his first true test of loyalty, will decide whether the North stands united or tears itself apart. What if Jon Snow had been raised not as the bastard of Winterfell, but as Ned Stark's true-born heir, carrying the name and legacy of House Stark from the very beginning? The story of Westeros would shift in ways few could ever imagine. From the first days of his childhood, Jon would not walk Winterfell's halls with the quiet shame of being whispered about as the Snow. Instead, every servant, soldier, and sworn bannerman would bow their heads to him, addressing him as the future Lord of Winterfell, the heir to the North. This change alone would ripple through every relationship in the Stark family, every political move in the realm, and every battle that would come later. Imagine Catelyn's coldness replaced by a reluctant acceptance, not because her heart suddenly warmed to him, but because she could not deny the truth Ned declared. Jon was his heir, his chosen blood, his first son, his legacy. The weight of it. This position would rest heavy on Jon's shoulders even as a boy. Robb, though still beloved as a brother, would grow up in the shadow of Jon's destiny. The North's lords would gather for feasts and glance not at Robb but at Jon, offering quiet nods of respect, testing the boy's demeanor, whispering among themselves whether he was ready to lead them when Ned's time ended. Can you feel the tension this would breed? Robb, proud and fierce, trying to match his brother in every training yard fight, every ride through the Wolf's Wood, every command spoken to their men. But Jon, carrying the name Stark with the authority of his father, would always stand one step ahead, and Robb's pride would slowly harden into frustration. Now pause for a second. Think about this. Catelyn Tully, a woman who already despised Jon for what she thought he represented, would not simply set her feelings aside. No, her disdain would grow sharper, more dangerous, because Jon wasn't just a reminder of her husband's supposed betrayal. He was the boy who stole her own children's birthright. Can you imagine the quiet fury in her eyes every time she looked at him seated at the high table, the lordly place reserved for Ned's heir? Her silence would cut deeper than words, but every lord and lady who visited Winterfell would see it, sense it, and wonder, if the Lady of Winterfell could not stand her husband's heir, what divisions might erupt when the old wolf finally passed. But here's where it gets insane, because Jon's life path would be torn away from the one we know. He would never take the black, he would never be sent to the wall, never forge bonds with the Night's Watch, never rise to become Lord Commander. Instead, he'd remain in Winterfell, learning the politics of the North, the responsibility of commanding armies, the duty of keeping bannermen loyal. He would sit in the council chambers, listening as Ned spoke with the Manderleys, the Karstarks, the Umbers, learning how every word shaped loyalty or sowed resentment. When Robert Baratheon rode north to offer Ned the handship, Jon would not be the boy standing quietly in the shadows, but the heir whose opinion mattered. And don't think Robert wouldn't notice. Oh no. Robert, who loved Ned as a brother, would clap Jon on the shoulder and laugh, saying, "Seven hells, Ned, you made a fine heir here, better than my cursed lot." And in that moment, Robert's drunken joke might spark something far more dangerous, What if Jon Stark, heir of Winterfell, became a potential match for a Baratheon princess? Wait, what? Do you see where this is going? Marriage alliances, power in the south, Winterfell's heir linked by blood to the Iron Throne itself. Suddenly, Jon isn't just a Stark of the North. He's a player in the Game of Thrones before the game even begins, and the Lannisters? You can bet they'd notice. Cersei, with her golden hair and venomous tongue, would see Jon as a threat to her children's dominance. Another wolf at the table, a reminder that the North had more than swords. They had legitimacy, honor, and possibly royal blood ties in their future. Meanwhile, in the South, whispers of Jon's birth would carry darker meaning. If he is Ned's heir, then every other child of Ned's becomes secondary. Robb, Arya, Sansa, Bran, Rickon. How does that change their paths? Sansa, once betrothed to Joffrey, might now be dismissed as less valuable because her brother already holds Winterfell's future. Robb, no longer destined to lead armies, might simmer with resentment, his pride cut to the bone. Arya, though still wild and restless, would look to Jon with even fiercer loyalty, seeing him not as a half-brother but as her true North, her lord. Bran, dreaming of climbing higher than the walls allowed, would now know that his family's legacy was not his to inherit, but his brother's to protect. And Rickon, too young to understand, would grow into a boy always told that his eldest brother's word was law. But here's the kicker. When war finally breaks out, when Ned is betrayed in King's Landing, and the Seven Kingdoms fracture, everything changes. Robb doesn't become the king in the North. No, that crown is never his. Instead, it's Jon Stark, young, battle-trained, respected by the Northern Lords, who rallies the banners. The great Jon doesn't kneel to Robb in a tent after a victorious battle. He kneels to Jon, shouting, "The king in the North!" Imagine. The scene. Jon, not yet 20, crowned beneath the weirwoods, every lord of the North swearing to follow him to death. The young wolf title, it belongs to Jon, and the history that follows is written not in Robb's blood, but in Jon's choices. Now, tell me, doesn't this single change flip everything upside down? Jon Stark, heir of Winterfell, king in the North, not bound by the wall but by duty, not ignored by his stepmother but despised by her, not an outsider but the very center of the realm's storm. But what choices would he make when faced with betrayal, love, and war? Would he march south against the Lannisters? Would he bend the knee to Stannis? Or would the North stand alone, led by a wolf who was never meant to be a Snow at all? And here's where it gets crazy, because what happens when Jon learns the truth of his Targaryen blood while already crowned in the North? Would he still honor his Stark name, or would fire and blood clash with ice and honor in ways no one could survive? Trust me, you won't believe what happens when we explore that. Jon Stark's crown weighed heavier with every raven that flew into Winterfell. The news of Ned Stark's execution still clung like frost in the hearts of the North, but it also hardened them. The lords rallied not only because they mourned their fallen warden, but because they saw in Jon the embodiment of everything Ned had been: honor, strength, loyalty, and more. This was not the boy they once whispered about as a bastard. This was their king, the silent wolf. But even as the North swore loyalty, cracks formed in the ice. Every crown draws shadows, and Jon's reign was no different. Robb's anger grew colder by the day. He would never betray his brother openly, never unsheathe steel against him, but resentment festered. He sparred harder in the yard, argued louder in councils, and his gaze lingered too long on Jon's chair at the high table. Catelyn, seeing Robb's struggle, began planting quiet seeds. "You are your father's son," she whispered to him at night. "Never forget, Winterfell was meant for you." Though she never spoke treason outright, her words fed the fire. Sansa, caught between grief for her father and confusion at her new kingly brother, grew more distant. Arya, far from home, would hear rumors of Jon's crown and hold on to them, like a lifeline. Bran and Rickon, still children, could not understand the shift, but even they noticed their mother's colder tone, their brother's heavier silence. Here's where the real twist begins. The lords of the North, united in public, began testing Jon in private. Lord Karstark pressed him on vengeance. "Will you march south and bathe in Lannister blood?" The Manderleys whispered of feasts and gold, questioning whether their king could match the South's power. The Umbers wanted action. Raids, fire, proof that the North was no longer meek. Jon listened to each, weighing his choices carefully. He knew one reckless move could doom them all. Unlike Robb's rashness, Jon's caution both steadied and frustrated his bannermen. To them he seemed too slow, too thoughtful, but they could not deny his presence carried weight. Weight. This is where it gets insane. Because far to the south, Tywin Lannister received word of Jon Stark's coronation. Tywin, ever the cold strategist, saw the danger. A Stark boy with a crown is nothing new, he told his council. But this one is Ned's heir, legitimized, and the North will bleed itself dry for him. His golden gaze turned sharp. He must be broken early before his roots deepen. Already plans formed. Marriages to divide the Starks, promises to lure bannermen, whispers of alliances meant to pull the wolves apart. Meanwhile, Stannis Baratheon brooded on Dragonstone. The fires whispered to him of treachery and kings, of a wolf crowned in the snow. He clenched his jaw, muttering, "The North is not theirs to keep. The Iron Throne is mine by right." And in his cold logic, he began planning how to bring Jon Stark to heel. A raven was penned. Demands for allegiance, threats of fire and sword if denied. But Jon... He read the raven by candlelight, the ink still wet with Stannis' pride. His face betrayed nothing, though his gut twisted. Another. "King demands my knee," he murmured. He thought of Ned, of honor and oaths, of the blood spilled for Robert's rebellion. And then, with calm certainty, he said aloud to his council, "The North will not kneel." The room erupted. Some cheered, some argued. But Jon's voice silenced them all. "We are wolves. We stand. If Stannis wants our loyalty, he must earn it, not with threats, but with justice." Oh my God, can you feel it? Every choice Jon makes creates ripples. Refusing Stannis sets the stage for conflict, not only with the South, but with the so-called rightful heir of Robert's rebellion. And this isn't even the end of it. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen hears whispers of the North's crowned wolf. "The wolves crown their own," Ser Jorah mutters. "They will not bow easily." Daenerys' lips tighten, fire in her eyes. "Then when my dragons fly, the wolf will kneel or burn." Here's where it gets crazy. Because even as kings and queens plot, Jon faces betrayal closer to home. Lord Bolton, cold and cunning, kneels in council, but his mind twists in darker places. Ramsay lingers in the shadows, waiting, plotting. And Littlefinger? Oh, Littlefinger sees opportunity. A Stark heir with no wife, no southern alliances? A perfect opening to weave his webs of marriage and manipulation. He imagines Sansa by Jon's side, the North and the Vale united under his quiet hand. "Chaos," he whispers, "is a ladder, and Jon Stark is its first rung." But let's not forget the most chilling twist, because while lords bicker and kings posture, the real threat gathers in the far north. Beyond the wall the dead march. Jon, tied to Winterfell, does not yet ride with the Night's Watch. He does not see their rising power, their endless march. The wall stands unprepared, its men stretch thin, and no one listens when the wildlings cry of death in the frost. Imagine it, Jon Stark, crowned in Winterfell, blind to the storm beyond the wall until it's far too late. And yet, something gnaws at him. In dreams, he sees the cold, the shadows, the sound of wings in the night. He wakes sweating, clutching at the sheets, whispering to himself, "Why do I feel the wall calling me? Is it blood? Is it fate? Or is it the truth of who he really is, buried beneath names and crowns?" Here's the kicker, Jon's political. Battles in the south will be nothing compared to the war creeping toward him from the north. But for now, his focus remains fixed on vengeance, alliances, and survival. And the choices he makes in these next moments? They'll decide whether the North rises stronger than ever, or tears itself apart from within. The chill of betrayal always begins quietly, like the first flakes of snow before a storm. For Jon Stark, king in the north, that storm was already building in the shadows of his own camp. On the surface, Winterfell thrived under his banner. The lords pledged loyalty. The banners of Wolf and Direwolf flew high, and the songs of Ned's honor carried through the halls. But whispers are louder than songs. and the whispers were poison. Catelyn Stark, her grief for Ned twisted by resentment, could not stand her stepson's crown. To her, every council meeting, every loyal cheer, every kneel of bannermen felt like an insult to her children's birthright. Her voice, once soft in the halls of River Run, became sharper in Winterfell's chambers. To Robb, she whispered, "That crown was meant for you." To Sansa, she said, "Jon has stolen everything that should have been yours by blood." Her words dripped like venom, and though her children tried to resist, doubt seeped in. Robb wrestled with it most of all. He loved Jon, but love curdled when pride was wounded. Every time a lord praised Jon's command, Robb clenched his jaw. Every time Jon offered him counsel, Robb felt treated like a lesser. One night in the Godswood, Robb muttered aloud, "If I had worn the crown, father would still be avenged." Arya, watching from the shadows, snapped back, "Jon is king, and you know he's the one father would have chosen." But Robb's silence afterward said more than any argument could. Here's where it gets insane, because Jon, though sharp, was no mind reader. He saw the loyalty in his men's eyes, but not the doubt burning in Robb's. He trusted too deeply, believing honor would bind them all. That was his father's teaching after all. Honor keeps the pack strong. What Jon didn't realize was that honor could not stop daggers whispered in the dark. Meanwhile, the Boltons moved in silence. Rose, pale and cold, saw in Jon's crown both danger and opportunity. He knew the North's loyalty was fierce but fragile. "A wolf pup crowned too soon," he murmured to Ramsay. "Every pup bleeds if cut deep enough." Ramsay's grin spread wide, hunger in his eyes. Already their minds worked toward betrayal, not with open steel but with subtle treachery, the kind that breaks kings before swords are drawn. Wait, pause here, because in King's Landing the Lannisters learned of these cracks. Cersei sneered, "Let the wolves devour themselves. We'll pick the bones clean." Tywin, however, wasn't content to wait. His letters spread like wildfire, promises of gold, marriages, and titles sent to any northern house that might waver. The seeds of division were being sown not only in Winterfell's halls, but across the icy land itself. Jon's test came sooner than he could have imagined. A raven from the Riverlands carried news of Lannister brutality. Villages burned, women taken, fields salted. His council erupted in rage. "We march south now," shouted Lord Karstark. "We make them bleed," cried the Umbers. But Jon held up a hand, calm and steady. "We strike with wisdom, not wrath. The South expects wolves to charge blindly. We will not give them what they want." His words carried strength but not satisfaction. Many wanted blood, and restraint looked too much like weakness. Arya's voice echoed in his mind later that night. Stick them with the pointy end. She had always urged him toward action. He wondered if she'd have mocked him now for caution. But in his heart he knew, one wrong move could doom the North, and yet despite his care, betrayal drew closer. At River Run, Catelyn pressed the Blackfish to her side, whispering doubts about Jon's legitimacy. "He was never meant to wear the crown," she hissed. "Robb is the true heir, not this boy my husband foisted upon us." Some lords listened, torn between loyalty and blood. Some dismissed her, but the fracture widened all the same. Here's the kicker. Jon's greatest strength, his unshakable honor, made him blind to treachery. He believed his lords would stand as his fathers had stood, but the North was no longer Ned Stark's North. It was divided, hungry for vengeance and vulnerable to whispers. Meanwhile, beyond the wall, the dead stirred. Without Jon at the Night's Watch, the wall's defenses faltered. Small folk vanished in the frozen forests, villages north of the wall fell silent, and wildling scouts fled south screaming of pale blue eyes. The Watch sent desperate ravens, begging Winterfell for aid. "The dead walk," they wrote. "The wall cannot stand alone." Jon read these words with furrowed brow. His bannermen scoffed. "Tales for children," said Lord Glover. "Our war is with Lannister lions, not ghost stories." But in Jon's heart, unease grew. "Oh my God, do you feel the tension?" Jon pulled between vengeance in the south and dread from the north, with betrayal already gnawing at his own council. Every direction held danger, every choice a trap. If he marched south, the wall could fall. If he stayed in the north, the Lannisters would tighten their grip. And in the middle of it all, his own family's loyalty began to crack. And here's where it gets wild. Because soon Jon would be forced into a decision that would tear his heart apart. Would he fight the south for vengeance, or turn his gaze to the wall, where a storm far deadlier than any Lannister brewed? And worse, what happens when betrayal finally strikes, not from the south, but from within his own blood? The breaking point for Jon Stark came not from the south nor from the wall, but from within his own circle. Winterfell's great hall echoed with the voices of lords demanding action. Lord Karstark slammed his fist on the table. "Every day we wait, the Lannisters grow bolder. My sons did not die so we could sit in silence." Lord Umber roared his agreement, tankard sloshing ale onto the stone floor. "March now, King Jon, make them bleed." Jon's voice was steady but firm. "And when we march blindly, who holds the north? Who guards our children, our homes, our walls? The south would love nothing more than to draw us into their game. We will not be their pawns." His words carried weight, but behind the stern mask, his gut twisted. He could feel the anger of his bannermen, could see their patience thinning. Honor and restraint were strengths to him, but to men with blood debts they looked like hesitation. Robb's eyes burned across the hall. He had argued with Jon in private, but now, before all their lords, his frustration boiled over. "If we don't act, we'll be seen as cowards. Father's death cries for vengeance. And yet our king hides behind caution." The hall fell silent. A murmur rippled through the lords. For the first time, Robb had spoken not as Jon's brother, but as a challenger. Jon's jaw tightened. He loved his brother, but this was more than sibling rivalry. It was a crack in the crown itself. "This is not about vengeance, Robb," he said coldly. "It's about survival. Would you throw away thousands of lives for pride, for glory?" Robb's silence was heavy, but Catelyn's eyes glinted with a satisfaction she did not dare show openly. Here's where it gets insane, because the tension between brothers was not lost on their enemies. Rose Bolton, quiet and calculating, saw opportunity. In the shadows of the hall his pale eyes missed nothing. Later in private he whispered to his men, "The wolf crown is already splitting. All it needs is a sharper blade." Ramsay grinned, his fingers twitching as if already holding that blade. Meanwhile, ravens arrived from the wall, more desperate than before. "The dead march," they cried. "Villages are falling. We cannot hold." Jon pressed the parchment to the table, his knuckles white. His bannermen scoffed, dismissing it as old tales. But Jon's heart pounded with dread. He felt the truth in his bones, as if the words were carved into his very blood. That night he dreamt of snow, of shadows with blue eyes, of wolves howling. As ice closed over them, he woke with a gasp, whispering, "It's real." But when he brought it before his council, their reaction was fury. "You'd abandon vengeance for fairy tales?" Karstark bellowed. "The south spits on your father's grave and you chase shadows?" The lords pounded the table, shouting, demanding war against the Lannisters. Jon raised his voice above the storm. "Listen to me. If the wall falls, no throne, no crown, no kingdom matters. We will all be dead. And then, wait. This is where the betrayal cut deepest." Robb stood. His voice trembled, but his words were clear. "If my brother refuses to act, then I will. I will march south and bring father's killers to justice." Gasps filled the hall. Some lords cheered, others frowned, but the damage was done. In that moment, Robb Stark had split the pack. Catelyn stepped forward, placing her hand on Robb's shoulder. "Your father's honor lives through you," she said loudly enough for all to hear. "The crown was never meant for Jon." The words hung like a sword over Jon's head. He stared at his stepmother, his face pale but unyielding. "You would tear the north apart for your pride," he said quietly. "You damn us all." But Catelyn did not waver. Here's the kicker. Some bannermen began drifting toward Robb, murmuring their support. Others remained loyal to Jon, trusting his steadiness. Winterfell itself seemed to split down the middle. The silent wolf and the young wolf brothers in blood, now rivals in loyalty. The north, once united by grief, threatened to devour itself. Meanwhile, far away in King's Landing, the Lannisters laughed. News of division reached Tywin's ears, and his thin smile said everything. "Let the wolves fight each other," he told his council. And we will strike when they are weak. Letters flew again, this time aimed directly at Robb, tempting him with recognition, with titles, with the promise of vengeance against his so-called kingly brother. But oh my God, while men played their petty games, the true storm gathered. Beyond the wall, the dead did not wait for crowns or vengeance. They marched, silent and endless. And because Jon had not joined the watch, there was no Lord Commander to unite the Black Brothers, no Stark at the wall to rally them. The defences thinned, the cries grew louder, and still the North turned its eyes southward, blinded by blood and betrayal. And here's where it gets wild. Jon knew in his soul that the North was on the edge of ruin. He stood in the Godswood, one night staring at the heart tree, whispering, "Father, tell me what to do. Do I fight my brother? Do I abandon the wall? Every choice leads to death." The red leaves whispered in the wind, but no answer came. Trust me, you won't believe what happens when Jon finally faces the choice between crown and family, between vengeance and survival. That decision will not just change the North, it will change the fate of all Westeros. Winterfell's great hall had never felt colder, though the hearth roared with fire. Two wolves now stood at opposite ends of the table, Jon Stark, the crowned king in the North, and Robb Stark, his younger brother, his challenger, his rival. The banners of the direwolf hung above them both, but the sight no longer inspired unity. It carried a silent threat. The bannermen's eyes shifted back and forth, weighing their loyalties, measuring their chances, wondering which wolf would lead them to victory and which to ruin. Jon's voice carried first, steady but edged with steel. "This crown was given to me by the North's will. Our lords swore beneath the heart tree. Robb, I will not let our father's legacy be torn apart by division." His words rang with honor, but Robb's pride burned hotter. He stood tall, shoulders square, his voice trembling with anger. "And I will not let our father's killers go unpunished while you hide behind old tales of dead men walking. The South laughs at us. They see a Stark boy crowned in the snow, too afraid to strike." The room erupted, lords shouted, voices clashing like swords. Some roared for vengeance, others for patience. But the silence of Roose Bolton cut through it all, his eyes, pale and calculating, fixed on Jon. "Perhaps," Roose said softly, "a king who cannot act is no king at all." Ramsay's grin widened from the shadows, his hand twitching on his dagger hilt, savouring the scent of chaos like a hound sniffing blood. "Wait. Pause here. This is where it all spirals. Because in that moment, the North's unity shattered. Some lords rose to Robb's side, shouting their allegiance. Others pounded their fists for Jon, swearing loyalty to their silent wolf. The great hall shook with the thunder of division, and Catelyn's satisfied gaze said more than words. Her son had split the crown. But Jon? He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He stood in silence, letting the storm rage around him. And when it died down enough to hear his voice, he said only this: "If you would bleed the North for vengeance, do it without me. But know this, if the wall falls, no army in Westeros can save us. Not Lannister gold, not Baratheon fire, not dragon wings." His voice carried like an omen, and though some scoffed, others shivered at the weight of his words. Meanwhile, across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen heard whispers of wolves crowned in the cold. Her dragons grew stronger by the day, her followers more loyal, and the thought of another king rising in the far north stirred both curiosity and fury. "The Iron Throne is mine," she told Jorah, her voice hard as dragon steel. "No wolf will keep it." The seeds of a clash between ice and fire, between dragon and direwolf, were already sown, and in King's Landing, Tywin Lannister's golden mind saw everything. Letters were dispatched not only to divide the Starks further, but to tempt their bannermen with promises of land, coin, and titles. He whispered to Cersei, "The wolves will devour themselves. All we need do is watch." Yet even Tywin could not see the storm crawling south beyond the wall, a storm no coin could buy and no steel could stop. Here's the kicker. Jon's heart wasn't just torn between duty and vengeance, but between family and kingdom. Robb was not his enemy, yet Robb had become his rival. Every night Jon walked the Godswood, praying for guidance, begging the old gods to show him a path that did not end with blood between brothers. The trees whispered nothing but silence, And in that silence, Jon's mind sharpened. If the North could not be united by words, then it would be united by fire and steel. The first confrontation came not on southern soil, but in the riverlands. Robb marched with those who followed him, eager to strike at Lannister forces. Jon remained at Winterfell, keeping those still loyal. When word reached Winterfell that Robb had won his first skirmish, cheers erupted in the hall. Yet Jon's face did not soften. He knew victories could become graves if the wall fell. And worse, he knew Robb's march left Winterfell vulnerable, not just to southern enemies but to northern betrayal. Oh my God, because Roose Bolton made his move. Quietly, carefully, he shifted men, whispered promises to wavering houses, hinted at alliances with the south. Ramsay sharpened his blades, eager for slaughter. The wolves were not just divided, they were being hunted from within. And all the while, ravens screamed from the wall. "The dead are coming. We cannot hold." The words burned in Jon's hands, a nightmare made ink. He looked at his bannermen and saw disbelief, even mockery. But deep inside he felt the truth. The real war was not with lions or even dragons, but with death itself. Here's where it gets wild. Jon faced a choice no king should: fight his brother and tear the North apart, or march to the wall and abandon his crown. Every road bled. Every path ended in loss. And the choice he made would not just decide the fate of Winterfell, it would decide whether the living stood a chance against the endless night. The storm finally broke. Steel rang across the riverlands as Robb Stark, the young wolf, led half the North's banners against Lannister forces. At first, his victories were swift and sharp, feeding the songs of glory. Villages whispered of Robb as the avenger of Ned Stark, the wolf who would tear out the lions' throats. But every mile Robb marched south left Winterfell weaker. Every sword he carried away opened cracks in the North's defenses. Jon knew it. He stood in Winterfell's courtyard, watching the riders leave with heavy hearts. His own men urged him to act, to bring Robb back by force if needed. But Jon only said, "If I draw steel against my brother, the North dies before the first blow." His restraint kept his hands clean, but it also gave Bolton the room he needed to weave his treachery. Roose Bolton played the game in shadows. He pledged loyalty to both Jon and Robb, shifting his banners where the winds blew strongest. To Jon he bowed and spoke of patience. To Robb he whispered of betrayal in Winterfell. All the while Ramsay sharpened his cruelty in the Dreadfort, hungry for a chance to prove himself in blood. "A crown built on family love is weak," Ramsay muttered with a grin. "A crown built on fear never falls. Wait, because here comes the brutal twist." While wolves fought wolves and lions clashed with banners, the true storm struck at the wall. The dead came. At first in silence, then in screams. Villages north of the wall vanished, rangers never returned, and finally, the Watch sent its most desperate raven yet. "The wall will fall. Send aid or doom comes for us all." Jon read the words aloud in council. The hall fell into chaos. Some shouted it was lies, others called it cowardice. Lord Karstark spat, "Southron games are real, ghost stories are not." The Umbers roared, for war with the Lannisters. But Jon slammed his fist onto the table, his voice rising like thunder. "The dead are real. I feel it in my blood. If we do not march north, there will be no North to defend. And here's where it gets insane. The lords didn't just doubt him. Some began to leave. Whispers spread that Jon's visions, his dreams, were madness. That he used tales of death to avoid fighting lions. And when Robb's ravens came boasting of victory against Lannister hosts, the comparison was fatal. Robb was the wolf of action, Jon the wolf of hesitation. The crown of Winterfell trembled on his brow, but Jon would not let go of honor. 1. Night, he stood in the Godswood, Arya at his side. She was only a girl, but her voice carried fire. "They think Robb's the wolf to follow, but I know better. You're the one who listens, who sees further than swords. Father would have wanted you." Her words broke through Jon's silence, but also steeled him. "Then I'll prove it," he whispered. "Not to them, to the realm, to the living." Here's the kicker. Jon chose the wall. Against the fury of his bannermen, against the mockery of his rivals, he marched north with those still loyal. A smaller host, fewer swords, but hearts bound to him by something greater than vengeance, belief. He sent word to Robb, begging him to turn north. Robb's reply was short, sharp. "The south bleeds. I will not abandon it." The rift was final. The pack had split for good, and oh my God, do you feel the weight of that? Wolves divided, Lannisters watching, Boltons plotting, while Jon turned his eyes to the wall, and beyond it, the dead waited. For the first time, Jon Stark, king in the north, marched not to claim vengeance or defend land, but to face the truth only he seemed to see. That winter itself was the enemy. But here's where it gets wild, because fate wasn't done with him. On the road to the wall, a secret was revealed. A rider came from the Eyrie, cloaked in the Vale's colours, bearing a message from Littlefinger. It spoke not of war, but of blood. Your true mother was not some tavern wench, nor your father's sin. You are not only Stark, you are fire as well as ice. The word struck Jon like a blade. His hands shook, his mind reeled. He demanded proof, and the rider handed him sealed parchments, names, and whispers of Rhaegar Targaryen. Jon's crown felt heavier than ever. If the lords had doubted him before, what would they say when they learned their king carried dragons? Blood? Would they call him chosen or curse him as foreign? His silence grew colder, heavier, and his men began to whisper, "Their king carried secrets." Here's the moment. We are at the heart of the storm. Robb, the young wolf, rides south into glory and ruin. Jon, the silent wolf, marches north into death itself. Bolton sharpens betrayal, Littlefinger spins webs, Daenerys builds fire, and the Lannisters wait with golden patience. But in the dark beyond the wall, the Night King gathers his army, a storm no crown can stop. Snow fell heavier than ever as Jon Stark, king in the north, reached the wall. What should have been a towering shield of ice looked frail, battered, and desperate. The Black brothers lined the ramparts, gaunt and terrified. Their eyes widened at the sight of the Stark banners riding through the snowstorm. For a moment, hope flickered in the darkness. But behind that hope was fear. Fear of what stalked beyond the forest, of what even kings could not stop. Jon dismounted in the courtyard, Ghost at his side, his face grim. "Tell me everything," he demanded of the watch. Their Lord Commander, an aging man with hollow eyes, spoke in a trembling voice. "The dead walk. Villages are gone. We held them once at the fist of the first men, but now they come in numbers no man can count. If the wall falls, we all fall." The silence after those words was louder than any battle cry. Jon looked north, his jaw set. "Then we will hold." Back in the Riverlands, Robb pressed deeper into war. His victories thrilled his men, but Tywin Lannister's patience was unshakable. With each battle Robb won, Tywin drew him further south, further from home, further from Winterfell. And behind Robb's back, Rose Bolton began weaving the infamous betrayal. Letters flew to Casterly Rock, promises were exchanged, and daggers sharpened in silence. Robb had lions in front of him and traitors at his back, but he rode on, blind to the trap. Wait, because here's the brutal contrast. Robb bled for vengeance, while Jon bled for survival. One wolf fought lions, the other fought death itself. Which wolf carried their father's legacy? Which wolf carried Westeros's fate? The realm didn't know it yet, but its survival hung on the shoulders of the brother left behind in the snow. At the wall the storm broke. The horns blew 1, 2, 3 times. The dead had come. Shadows moved in the blizzard, blue eyes piercing the dark. Jon's men shivered, gripping steel, their courage shaking. Jon drew Longclaw, his breath frosting in the air. "Hold the wall," he commanded, his voice iron. The clash was unlike anything men had faced before. Steel shattered, screams echoed, and the stench of death choked the wind. Jon fought like a wolf possessed, Ghost tearing whites apart at his side. He moved through the chaos with fire and fury, each strike buying another breath for his men. Oh, my God! The sight was madness. The wall shook with the weight of the assault, but Jon's leadership held. He rallied broken lines, dragged men back to their feet, and struck down the dead with every ounce of strength. His bannermen, once doubting, now looked at him with awe. "Our king fights with the gods themselves," one whispered, as Jon cut through a White Walker, Longclaw's steel ringing with frost and flame. But here's the kicker. While Jon fought, death itself, betrayal, unfolded in the south. At the infamous wedding feast, the young wolf walked into Tywin's snare. Robb, Catelyn, his bannermen, they feasted under the banners of Frey and Bolton, and when the music changed, the knives came out. Blood splashed across the hall, wolves slaughtered, northern banners burned. Catelyn's last scream echoed before her throat was cut, and Robb's crown rolled in the dirt. The red wedding shattered the south, leaving the north in ruins. And yet, wait, Jon Stark still stood. When ravens carried the news north, the men of the wall trembled. Their king's brother was dead, their bannermen slaughtered. But Jon did not falter. He read the words in silence, then burned the parchment in the fire. "The pack survives," he said quietly. "We will not break." His voice carried the weight of every wolf fallen and every wolf still standing. In that moment, the North's hope shifted entirely to him. Meanwhile, across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen's dragons grew stronger, her eyes set westward. She heard whispers of the wolves' fall, of the silent wolf who fought death itself. For the first time, her fire and Jon's ice seemed destined to meet. "If this wolf still stands," she said, "then he is either my ally or my enemy." And, in the shadows of Winterfell, Ramsay Bolton smirked, his bastard grin cruel. With Robb dead, his father saw no more reason to wait. The Boltons claimed Winterfell, skinning loyalty from flesh, turning wolf banners into flayed men. Jon had won a battle at the Wall, but his home had already been stolen. Here's where it gets wild. Jon, bloodied from the fight against the dead, received the raven of the Red Wedding and Bolton's betrayal on the same night. His brother gone, his mother gone, his bannermen slaughtered, his home stolen. The weight should have broken him. Instead, it hardened him. In the silence of the Wall, with Ghost at his side and Longclaw in his hand, Jon whispered to himself, "I will take it all back. For father, for Robb, for the North." The silent wolf had survived where the young wolf had fallen. The realm thought the Starks broken, but Jon stood in the snow, fire and ice in his blood, ready to face both the dead in the north and the traitors in the south.